Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh and welcome to some more Gran Turismo Sport, a racing game developed by Polyphony Digital and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment for the PlayStation 4. Focusing on the game's online mode, known as Sport Mode, in this episode I take a look at my performance in the fourth race of the first stage of the 2019 Manufacturer Series season, which was a Group 3 race held at the Dragon Trail Seaside circuit. With that, let's get racing. Taking a look at the grid then, you'll see that we've qualified on pole position for this race, well 138.8. My story for qualifying, I was very surprised that my 138.8 was good enough for pole by 6/10 in the end, simply because that was my banker lap, and my potential fastest lap was a 138.0. However, in the actual qualifying session, when I went for my fast lap, I screwed up my preparation lap in that I came out of the pits right behind two guys who were jostling for position in order to get ready for their final fast laps, and I had to really back out of it on my preparation lap and try and get some distance between myself and them. But in doing that and not focusing on warming up my tyres, it meant that when I went into my fast lap and tried to attack turn 3 with maximum power, I ended up losing control of the car and I had to back out of my lap completely, otherwise I would have been off into the gravel and it would have been a nightmare. So I decided instead, right, settle for the banker lap, and because that was good enough for pole, what that instantly told me was I had the potential at least over one lap to dominate this race. If not over the race distance, at least hold on to the lead and manage the race accordingly. So then coming on to the race strategy, standard race of 9 laps, 1 pit stop required unless you decide to go for the no stopper, which is roughly 2 seconds off of the main pace. I'll be breaking it up into a 2-stint race, so my first stint would be 5 laps, ran the car in fuel mode 2 in order to save some fuel, avoid spending too much time in the pits, using a set of racing mediums for that stint, the softer of the 2 racing compound available, the other being the racing hard. After refueling the car for the second stint, I'll be running the car in fuel mode 1 maximum power for the final 4 laps, racing all the way to the finish. As we come to the end of the grid then, 18 drivers, all of us being B driver rating, we're going to get underway, and what you'll see me do when we start this race is I will be running the car in fuel mode 1 down into the first corner. Now that was because behind me was a Lamborghini Huracan, and what I thought to myself straight away was that car's going to have a straight line advantage over me. Naturally, it's a faster car. Now I have to consider they're going to have the slipstream advantage going down to turn 1, and I want to try and make sure they do not get too close as to go for an overtake into turn 1. Because when you overtake into turn 1, unless you go for the defensive inside line, it can cost you a lot of time fighting through that corner based on what I'd seen of footage and from experimenting different lines over my practice time. So what you'll see me do is I'm not worrying too much about trying to break their potential slipstream on me. I'm just focusing on getting the natural racing line into the corner, and I'm going to brake as late as possible. You see, I brake just a little bit later than Lamborghini, and that means they tuck in behind me. And as we come through turn 1 into turn 2 here and wrap that up, I'm already starting to put a little bit of distance from the Lamborghini. We've got through there cleanly, and they're falling back a bit into the clutches of the guys behind, 2 Ferraris in 3rd and 4th. As we come through turn 3, I'm going to lift a little bit simply because the tyres are cold at this point, and until they're warm I can't attack turn 3 at maximum pace, otherwise I'm going to end up potentially throwing it onto that outer curb, if not into the gravel, screwing up my race completely. As we come down the hill, begin sector 2 with turn 5 here, flying into turn 6 and 7, we're just going to attack these corners and get up the hill towards turn 8 with maximum potential speed. What we'll see is the deficit of straight line speed will start to come back into the favour of the Lamborghini, in that because they've got the ability to just put their foot down on the throttle and charge up the hill and now down it into turn 8, they can start to close that gap to us. We're nailing our braking point just after the 150 board there, but just before the 100 board, so around the 130 metre margin. We now come out of turn 8 and start to go into the 2 final chicanes, a nasty section this one, and the gap's already 1.5 seconds between ourselves and Lamborghini. We just need to get through here cleanly, not just once, all 9 times, because that final chicane in particular, turns 11 and 12, you get it wrong and plaster it into the wall, your race is over. But we didn't there, as we now charge down towards turn 13 to complete our lap. And we see the gap between ourselves and the Lamborghini behind is shrinking quite rapidly at this point, down to 1.2 seconds as we come out of turn 13 and conclude the lap. And I've got a strong feeling in the back of my mind that Lamborghini is pushing in fuel mode 1 to stay away from the Ferraris behind and try and get as close as possible to us. And what I was thinking at this point, if that Lamborghini is going to attack us, I'm going to let it through, simply because I don't want to screw up my own race at this point in time. And instead, we're now going to switch to the replay camera as we go down to the first chicane, so turns 1 and 2, and keep an eye on the Lamborghini behind, because you're going to see something happen at turn 3, which I thought may happen to myself, but I'd practiced for it, and unfortunately it happens to the chap behind, who's really pushing hard at this point in the race, in my opinion. Going through turn 3, we get it cleanly, whereas the Lamborghini spins out. Now, why does this happen? In my opinion, one of the things you can do at turn 3 is you can cut the corner quite heavily. And by cutting it, you can actually have 2 wheels on the curb and 2 wheels on the grass. Something you will see me do once later on in this race, and I'm really pushing the car hard. However, there is a risk implied in making that cut. Not necessarily in terms of being assigned a penalty. It's very rare to get a penalty by cutting that corner. But instead, in terms of the stability of your own car, and in the case of the NSX, what I found was, if you cut turn 3 such that you had 2 wheels on the white lines and 2 wheels on the grass, when you emerge back onto the curb at the end of your cut in the turn 3, it actually caused the right hand side of the car to lift. And by lifting off of the race circuit, if you then decide to apply full throttle, or alternatively apply full steering lock going into turn 4, it caused the car to become incredibly unstable and cause your line to become ruined. Alternatively, as you saw there with the Lamborghini, caused the car to spin out. Now, of course, the Lamborghini's overall settings in terms of weight balance and distribution will be different from the NSX's, so I can't quote exactly what happened to their car, but we saw they lost control in potentially cutting turn 3 following in our suit there, and as a result they've dropped down the field, and now the closest competitor to us is the Spanish Toyota, the Toyota Supra, in second place at this time. As we conclude our second lap then, let me come on to why I was going to let the Lamborghini through, and want to focus on managing my own race. At this point in time, what I'm thinking is I've got control of the race pace because I'm in first place. So as a result, I don't need to outrace the guys behind in terms of race pace. If I can maintain a gap, as I'm doing so far, around the 1.8 second region, as we come very nicely out of turns 1 and 2, then the guys behind have to push extra hard in order to close the gap to myself, and I can focus on saving fuel in this first stint, spending even less time in the pits. And my fuel saving target was to come into the pits with a fuel percentage of around 12 to 13%. If I could do that, then I'd be minimising the time spent in the pits based on my racing simulation runs, and I'd be able to come back out on track, refueling to around the 81% mark, and be able to attack the track in fuel mode 1 the entirety of the second stint. So that's why if the Lamborghini was going to come charging up behind me, I'd let them through and use their slipstream to potentially pull me along some of these straighter sections, such as the run out turn 7 down to turn 8 as you're seeing right now, and on top of that on the start finish straight, so because then I could move down to fuel modes 3 or 4 and save even more fuel in a limited number of sections, and just simply put the pressure on the Lamborghini to have to pull distance from me, so that way they wouldn't be benefiting from being in the lead, they'd be actually at a disadvantage going into the second stint of the race, assuming they were going to pit. Now, talking about the no stop as well, one thing that's starting to come to my mind as we come towards the end of lap number 3 was the potential for the guys behind to do a no stopper. But what I thought to myself is none of the guys behind have really shown that they're potentially going for that no stopper, because you'd be running the car about 1.5 to 2 seconds off of the lead pace for a single pit stop. So as a result, I'm not worried about anyone particularly between myself and, say, going down into 5th or 6th. It'd be guys who are, say, around the 10th position who are managing a no-stop effectively. But for now, having set our fastest personal lap of the race, a 1:39.8, 4/10 slower than the Israeli Ferrari in 3rd place, with them setting a 1:39.4, we seem to be managing this race well. And in particular, what I'm starting to notice, every lap I'm looking at the timer in the top left-hand corner of my screen to tell myself the gap between 1st and 2nd. What I'm thinking is I seem to be doing very well going through sector 1 in particular. I'm able to open up a couple of attempts through turns 1 and 2 in particular, and also turn 4 against the guys behind, who are fighting as well. We have to keep that in mind. But in general, I seem to be faster in the first sector, the second sector, so turns 5 through to 8. I seem to be roughly matching the pace of the guys behind, and it's sector 3 with the nasty 2 chicanes, so turns 9 through to 12, where I'm losing time because I'm lifting quite heavily. I'm not pushing the car too hard and running the risk of clattering the wall at turn 11 in particular. And as a result, if I can manage this approach of being the fastest guy in sector 1, or one of the fastest guys there, and then matching everybody in sector 2, and then being a bit slower in sector 3, I've got nothing to worry about in terms of that gap between myself and the guys behind coming down. What I have to worry about is if I make a mistake into this section in particular. If you make a mistake and hit one of the walls, you are going to ping pong off of the wall into turn 11, into the wall coming out to turn 12, or you're just going to spin out and that will ruin your race. And I don't want to even ping pong a wall, I don't even want to scratch a wall coming out of the chicane, instead I want to get through there smoothly every time. And as we come to the end of lap number 4, you're going to see some guys dive into the pits, potentially trying to use the undercut at this point. Whereas for myself, it looks as though the Spaniard and the Israeli behind are really fighting hard, and that gap has now opened up to 3.1 seconds. And as the Ferrari behind in second place now comes across the line, that gap has opened up even more. It looks as though there's quite a bit of fighting going into turn 13 for the pair of them, and it's actually cost that Ferrari quite a bit of straight line speed, and the gap has now widened all the way to 5.5 seconds as we're on our 5th lap, and we're just going to manage the lap accordingly and bring it into the pits at the very end. Now, one thing at this point is, what about the no stoppers? Well, at the time, whilst I knew that you'd have to run the car about 1.5 to 2 seconds off the pace, I didn't really think about what that mean in terms of what I'd observe in the timing in the top left hand corner of my screen if I went into the pits and came out behind someone who was on a no stop strategy, how the gap would start to come down. And that was a fact that wasn't really preying on my mind, but you're going to see that come into effect after the pit stop. But for now, let's focus on the driving, getting it smoothly through sector 2 here, now coming over the brow of the hill and down into turn 8. We haven't really put a foot wrong so far. We've perhaps been a little bit erratic in certain sections, particularly the final chicane, where we perhaps haven't got it as smooth as we'd like, but we haven't really put a foot wrong so far in terms of racing this race, or driving this race, however you want to phrase it. As we set a personal best there for sector 2, only 4 thousandths faster than our previous personal best through there, but still good. As we come charging through, we'll see, it wasn't a personal best, sorry, after 2 sectors, a personal best of 4 thousandths, I should point out. I haven't got my session timings in the middle of the bottom of the screen because I'd rather focus on the fuel map. As we come through to the end here, you'll see that I take a slightly different line going through turn 13. I want to get as nice and tight as possible and then get on the power to charge into the pits. And I'll be switching down to fuel setting 1. And we can see in terms of the amount of fuel we're coming in, we're above target. I've come in with 14 to 15%. And that's because we've been doing a little bit more lifting through the final section in particular, and that saves some fuel. And then coming to the pits now, I'm getting ready to stamp on the do not refuel button at 81% because that'll be enough to get me to the end, as the guys do a cracking pit stop as always, putting on another set of racing mediums, and we can see that one guy has gone through to take the provisional lead. Not the provisional lead, sorry, to take the lead, which I'd be hoping to inherit the provisional lead if they come into the pits at the end of, say, lap 6 or 7. Well, at this point, I wasn't thinking about that. I was actually panicking in my head, thinking that the guy in first, the Spaniard, is doing a no-stop, and so now I've got to hunt that down. So what you're going to see me do here is actually make a series of small mistakes. Turns 1 and 2, no problem. Get that nailed up quite nicely, albeit I could have been a bit tighter on the entry point into turn 1. But I'm actually pushing the car quite hard. I am going to live through turn 3, being aware of the fact I can't do the section full out with cold tyres. But now I'm starting to get a little bit tight on certain corners, getting a bit sideways going into turn 4 there, and you're going to see that throughout the rest of this initial lap, because what I was thinking was I've got to chase down first place. But what I'm not thinking, as I explained before I came into the pits, is actually if first place is holding roughly the same time between myself and them at the moment, they're not on a no-stop. They're going to be stopping, because you can't just manage that race pace unless you are a really good driver, which I'd assume we're all roughly the same skill level based on the driver ratings. You wouldn't be able to just match me for pace, albeit perhaps lose a little bit of time over each lap, say 0.3 to half a second, if you were doing that no-stop, because you'd have to manage your fuel accordingly. Now, if I'd factored that in, I would have actually calmed down a little bit here. But because I'm attacking and worrying about that now, it means that I'm getting a little bit scatterbrained going through certain sections, and again you'll see here, I don't nail it as precisely coming through the final chicane, meaning I have to lift a bit more than I could have perhaps wanted to. But as we come towards turn 13, it's announced in the top left hand corner of your screen that the Spaniard in first is definitely hitting as we come out of turn 13. There we go, they're pitting. They managed their race distance well on that first stint, but we're going to inherit the lead now. We're back on pole. That means that whole worry about the guy in front doing a no-stop is alleviated, albeit I have worn the tyres a little bit more than perhaps I would have liked to, and now it's just a case of managing this race to the end. Now the gap between myself and the chap in second, the Israeli and the Ferrari, is around the 3.4 to 3.5 second region at the moment, and you may be thinking at this point, well, does this race become a bit boring, it's just a natural run to the end? Well, not in my personal opinion in terms of me driving the car, because I have to nail every section as I have been for the last 6 laps. And here you see I do cut turn 7, not punished at all for it in terms of a penalty, and at the same time, because I got it straight through there and I managed to get it right so that way I had my 2 wheels on the curb rather than on the white line and 2 wheels on the grass, the car wasn't propelled upwards into the stratosphere, instead it was flat through the corner, and it meant that I could line up nicely for turn 4. And that's a cut you could do, albeit I didn't really want to resort to that, as I get a little bit sideways coming out to turn 5, and that ruined my line going even further sideways coming out to turn 6. And this is a point I really want to emphasise with regards to this track. This is a lovely track which punishes you for making the smallest of mistakes. And as we come through turn 8 here, I get a little bit too tight on the corner. I mean, I almost dip onto the inside of the curb, albeit I don't actually put a wheel onto the red section there, fortunately. Now we're coming through the final set of chicanes here, turns 9 and 10 and 11 and 12. You see here I lift, but I don't turn in as early, and I almost end up clutching the wall at turn 11. But the reason I get that back under control is because I lift even further and manage the angle of the car, and that's something that I practiced a lot in my practice sessions at simulating the race distance. What do I do if I start to lose control of the car going into turn 11, so that final chicane, because I don't want to hit the wall? And that was me enacting my preparatory measures there, in the fact that I got the car under control, lost a bit of speed. In fact, I've lost a second to the Ferrari behind. They're really pushing hard and they got through there nicely compared to myself. But that's just to show you what exactly I was playing for there, and the fact I didn't want to make any mistakes. Now I switch into the replay camera here, or I should say significant mistakes. Switching to the replay camera to give you an idea of how the NSX flows across the circuit throughout a single lap. Give you an idea as well of how the track lines up, because whilst you're seeing it from the onboard camera at the same time, it can be different watching the track from a third person perspective. And I must say, coming back to my point that I've raised on the previous lap, I love this track simply because all the corners flow into one another and all the sectors flow into one another. So if you make a mistake in one corner, such as we come down to sector 2 here, going into turn 5, the left-hander coming up, you make a small mistake here, it will punish you in turns 6 and 7. You lose that speed going up the hill and down in towards turn 8. It's the same with the chicanes as well. Get your line wrong in one, i.e. turn 9 and 10, and then as a result when you go into turns 11 and 12, that's going to compromise your line even more and perhaps see you hit the wall, which we haven't done so far and hopefully won't do for the rest of the race distance. And we see the Ferrari behind us is gradually maintaining the gap, if not closing in on us, and we're doing our very best to match their pace. Get a little sideways coming out of turn 8, but not too much in there. Perhaps lost the 10th, but nothing to worry about. And now we're coming through the final 2 chicanes here. 9 and 10 smoothly through, and smoothly through turns 11 and 12. Straight line it out at 12, getting nowhere near the wall. Going out at 12, because if you graze the wall, that's going to cost you some time. And now just charging down towards turn 13. It's looked a very smooth lap. Perhaps we could be on for our personal best of the race distance so far. And what you'll note is I take a bit of a different line going into turn 13 than most of the drivers that I've seen take the corner, simply because I take a much more outside to inside line. I go very deep into the corner and then let the car flow through and line up to get on the power and straight line out of turn 13 onto the start finish straight, because I enjoy taking a lot of speed onto that straight and then charging down towards turn 1, trying to alleviate that difference of straight line speed compared to some of the other drivers. Now on the final lap here, we can see we did set our personal best of a 1:39.3 on that previous lap, almost as close to the personal best set and the fastest lap of the race set by the Ferrari behind a 1:39.1, and that's just a case of getting this lap on target. And we can see that the gap has opened up between myself and the Ferrari to roughly 2.5 seconds, so it seems as though we gained a little bit of time over them as we set a purple sector for sector 1, and we're really going for it at this point. As we come down into turn 5, getting it nicely lined up. How about turn 6? Can we get there? Could have perhaps been a little bit tighter, but not too much in there. Perhaps lost half a tenth. As we come out of turn 7 and now charging up the hill and going over the brow of the hill down in towards turn 8 here. Everything's smooth so far. Comes to the end of sector 2, braking just after the 150 board as always. Getting it nicely lined up, nice and tight. Get on the power gradually, build the power, get onto the throttle. Full throttle now, going towards the final section. We can see we're still on the course to set the fastest lap of the race, and here I'm not going to take any risks going through the final chicanes. I'm just going to take it nice and easy, straight line it out of turn 12, almost going to get it nicely lined up as not graze the wall at all, and now just down to turn 13, one corner remaining. Let's brake just before the 100 board, take our standard racing line through here and bring it to the end. Car goes a little sideways, tyre wear starting to come in with those rears, and now it's just the start finish straight to wrap up the race and come home in first for our first time with the Honda NSX. Having had time to reflect, I'm really proud of this win, and that it goes to show that the practice I put in over the 3-week break really paid off, and if anything it bolsters my confidence even more as we move on to the 5th race at the Sardinia Road Track B No. 2 circuit on Wednesday the 10th of July. And I've got to say, it's great to be back on track. I've missed this. Until then, thank you for watching. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like, comment or subscribe for future episodes. As always, I've been TX141, and until next time, take care and drive safely.